Rick Hildebrand,
Here.
Rob Chapanelli,
Here.
David Kader,
Here.
Evan Eiler. Not here. Gail Falk. Not here. Rachel Gades.
Here.
Mike Greenberg, not here. Peter Ireland.
Here.
Suzanne Jones.
Here.
Pat King.
Here.
Stephanie Lawrence.
Here.
Ian Odeji. Not here. Don Philibert.
I'm here.
Judy Scott.
However it may appear to your computer, I am completely here.
Half here.
How about Margaret Tando?
She looks like she tried to join the other side.
Just
Ron.
came in. She just got in.
Okay.
She was just
Okay.
admitted. I don't, well, maybe she's on page 2.
Yep, page 2.
She is here. There
She is on page 2. Hi, Margaret. Rob Tortolani.
Here.
Scott Tucker.
Here.
Megan Campbell.
Here.
Kurt Kuehl. No Bill Reynolds. Justin Chang, I don't believe. Lauren Lehman, no. Scott Frenier.
I'm here.
No Tracy. David Herlihy.
Here.
Colin Ettinger.
Here.
Okay, I don't think, is Marcy on here? I don't think so.
They are so fun.
And any other guests? Anybody here that I did not call? Okay,
Don't see
that's
any
it.
guests. Great.
Thank you.
We can move on to public comment. Is there any public comment? No. We can move on to the approval of the minutes from the June 4th meeting. And if you all have had a chance to review those, I'll entertain a motion to approve them.
So
So moved,
moved,
Chapanelli.
Lorenz.
Second, Philibert.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor, play aye.
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 Any opposed? Abstentions or recusals? Great. Board issues. The only board issue I had was another business, so we'll get to that in other business, and that's around the document for the advisory commission on additional licensing models. So we'll get to that later in the agenda. David, administrative update.
Sure, got a number of administrative updates. First, I wanted to mention that Tracy's on her annual decompression break. She goes to, she puts a lot into her efforts at her job, and like everybody, but she really knocks herself out. And then she goes away for 3 weeks to restore herself, camping at a waterfront site on Lake Groton. And I just want to add a huge thank you to Kelly, Ron, and Marcy for all pitching in to take over Tracy's duties and keep all the plates spinning while she's gone. The computer project is really a huge issue for most of us now on the staff. It's taking a lot of time for Ron, Tracy, Kelly, and me. We just finished the first sprint, which is what they refer to as these focused periods when they bring on board a piece of the application, and we just finished the first licensing part. So that was a lot on Tracy. And it used to be we would do these projects and the contractor would do all their work and then we test it and find tons of mistakes. They do it a new way now where they do a small piece and then we test it. And Tracy really, I think she worked 24 hours one day doing testing on a lot of the licensing stuff. And that gives them lessons that they learn so that the developers, as they build additional pieces, it's going to be a better product as they go along. So Tracy is our subject matter expert on licensing, and Kelly is our subject matter expert on on the enforcement side. And right now, there's some of the contractors are taking their time off, and next week we'll be going into the first big build on the enforcement side, and that will be a lot of work for Kelly. So on top of filling in for Tracy, she'll be doing that. But I just want to give kudos to Tracy. The contractors really called her out as exceptional for her not only her mastery of our licensing process, but her ability to quickly become adept at doing the testing and making her way through the new system. So it's been a lot of work, and it's going well.
Right.
One other thing that's been taking a lot of time for Ron is the VIPIP contract. And there's been two challenges with the VIPIP contract. The first was that beyond our control, we ran into some delays outside of the health department and in the having the request for proposals posted, and that we were running into an issue that the contract was going to expire, and it did on Monday. So Ron had to quickly put together an amendment to extend the contract for an additional 3 months, which is a lot of work in our system in and of itself. And that was done successfully. And we're good for an additional 3 months. And we have that additional time to get the current contract, to get the new contract completed and approved. And that's been going really well. Ron has done a great job of bringing together a lot of different people to work on that, and we've had great support from Justin on the legal side, and so I'm sure that will be completed and will be in place long before the amendment runs out in September. I did want to mention that we've been sending out reimbursement forms and ask everybody to try and return those as quickly as you can so we can get your money. We like to do that. And we've also been working on the newsletter, very close to ready to go out. And we may even get that out here before Friday tomorrow, so that people can see it before they go on vacation. I also wanted to mention that I had a first request from VIPIP to schedule a liaison meeting in the fall, and I know we got a number of people out now, so I'm gonna hold off a little bit on sending out an email request. But especially for the newer members, it's the contract calls for us to have a liaison at least one a year liaison meeting, and it's always a pretty interesting event. They have their team, some positions from their governing board and staff people and the medical director come together with a group representing the board to discuss any issues of mutual interest, how the program is going, things that may be on the horizon. And we can now do that virtually. It used to be really hard to get everybody to be able to travel, but we'll probably do that in October or November, and in coming weeks I'll send out a request to see if we can get a group together for that. And that's all I had for the administrative update, Rick.
Great. For the VIPIP liaison meeting, does that fall under the open meeting rules, David?
Well, technically, I think it would. I'd have to ask Justin for an official legal opinion on that. We've never had anybody express interest in attending, but in theory, it is.
I'm thinking more in the era of Zoom and YouTube and all the other things that we use to now share meetings, sometimes the conversation in those meetings can address some concerns that we have. And I just would want to make sure that we're doing things appropriately, I guess is my point.
Yeah, I can have a conversation with Justin. I'm not aware of any exception that would allow us to consider it not a public meeting. We
Yeah.
could ask him also to look at, anticipate any exceptions that might apply. I mean, we don't normally ever talk about specific cases.
Nope.
So it's really just, general policy issues, and technically it is a public meeting.
Okay. Anyway, we'll ask for more board input for attendance when we have more folks, but usually it's a good meeting. Great. All right, moving right along. Other business. So first item of other business is to again bring up the new guidance document from the Advisory Commission on additional licensing models for internationally trained physicians. So as a reminder, we had circulated this prior to last month, and I had asked that people review this document so we could give some input here. We have until the 11th of this month to give suggested changes. This is the second document to come out of that advisory commission, and more around the how to operationally oversee the organizations that are going to be providing supervision. Have people had a chance to review that document? Yes, good. Do people have any comments about things they'd like to suggest to FSMB on the document?
So I did get a couple of email responses. Thank you
Great.
to those of you who did respond. If there are no additional comments, I'll forward you something, Rick, based on our discussion last month and the written comments that I did receive for your approval, and I'll have to upload that to the site by July 11th.
David, could you share with us the sort of nature of some of the suggestions there?
Sure. There really were just a couple of comments that I had talked about a little bit at the last meeting, and that I summarized in the email that I sent out. One was having to do with the calling out the fact that the document maybe didn't mention the idea that the programs need to be attentive to the need to provide for the safety and good care of the patients who are receiving treatment by somebody in one of those programs. And then there also was as Dr. King pointed out last time that we discussed this, there's not much mention of how resource intensive this is. And that was, and the third one, I'm sorry, I didn't have my notes out in front of me here.
It's okay.
And I wanted to pull up the email to make sure I don't leave anything out. Sorry.
Around funding.
Yeah, and and the other point that I had mentioned in the email was that the guidance document should include language that it is important for the states to meet the high standards that are set forth in the document without compromise. And that's not only because it's for the quality of the program for the participants and for patient safety, but also because consistency is going to be vital as among the states. It's going to be vital.
I would think so.
If the ITPs who become licensed through this process are going to be eligible to get licensed in other states. That if there's a real disparity among the states that enact these provisions, that it's going to limit the portability of licensure for the people who come in to practice by that pathway.
Pat.
Yeah, just to kind of reiterate what I had brought up before, and also David's last point about lack of portability, I think that is the way I would understand it. That will definitely be the case because many of the states are enacting legislative changes that are slightly different. So it'll be interesting to see over time how those are resolved. Maybe they will be, but at least initially, I don't see these as being licenses that are portable among states. But to go back to my point that I made last time with the resource intensity, it just makes me uneasy from the perspective of our board to put the boards responsible for final assessment or any type of well, I guess it would be final assessment in whatever form that is in terms of competence. And that seemed to be what the end result was in this. So I don't know that there's any entity, the supervising entities, the way I read the document, are really going to be responsible for determining competence. It'll be up to the state boards. And I think that puts us in a very difficult position, mostly because we are not, we depend on our system we have of UME, undergraduate, GME, medical licensing exam. We depend on those components to determine competence. So it's not something we usually do, and that's where additional resources might be needed. So I don't know. And now it's been over a month since I've read this, David, but is that fair enough to say that the state boards will be left with some responsibility in that regard?
Absolutely. And that's, that's part of what's driving such a prospect for so many resources being needed. But at the same time, it's a burden in that way, but it's also, the states, I think boards have pushed hard to get that responsibility because the other option is for states kind of to lose the discretion to deny if there's concerns about competence.
Yeah.
So it's this, the boards have wanted to have that authority, but there's a lot of responsibility that comes with it.
To go along with that, I wonder if the Federation is ready to step up and make some type of template or recommendations on the process for determining competency for state, in terms of the state boards.
Right. Yeah. That's, the draft that we're reviewing, it really I think they tried to do that, but it's really quite general, and it
Yeah.
talks about relying on the milestone system. And I know there was discussion, even it was mentioned in Seattle, that the ACGME had agreed that there's no, they're not going to assert copyright protection or
Mhm.
any kind of ownership rights would be violated by state boards, mimicking the milestone system,
Mhm.
or the programs themselves mimicking the milestone system for
Right.
administering that.
And I think that's okay, but then I see, so how would we do it? Would we have a subcommittee of us who look at the milestones and look at the individual? And that might be okay when there's a couple. But when there's a lot of people, potentially it would be difficult. So, I mean, New York has been doing this for years, so I'm sure it obviously is possible, but it's just, there's just some unknowns.
Yeah, Pat, my impression is that that was not their intent. It was more that we would be regulating the program, and in the same way that the ACGME regulates the program, right? And then the program would be responsible for providing that supervision. That we still would need the resources to effectively do that, and would definitely require some committee to do that. I think in the state of Vermont, you're probably talking about one entity, right?
Yeah.
That might even be interested in this. In other states, it's not. And I think of some states like Rhode Island, where there's an incredibly limited board and more than one entity that likely would be, potentially doing this. That could be a problem. It could be a big problem. But we got a couple other folks with their hands raised. Why don't we move on to Bob?
Oh, okay. I'm just wondering if this might be an opportunity for us to work with any of the other boards like Maine and New Hampshire to. I just wonder if they may be applying to multiple boards and, for acceptance, and I don't know, this might be an opportunity to share or some of the work. I don't know. I just came to think about that. Number one. Number two, I had the same problem with Pat. I reviewed these things about 4 weeks ago, and I thought I had one or two comments, but I didn't get them to you yet. So I wonder, Dave, if you could send out a quick email on these comments that people have made, and then we can add to that if after reviewing the document again. It's just been too long ago.
Okay, I can,
Thank you.
I don't know and I'll send it to all board members. I'm sorry if that's redundant or if anybody who's not interested in doing it, but I'll just send that to everybody.
Okay. Evan.
Yeah, I had a really interesting parallel experience a couple of weeks ago. I'm an officer in the American Psychiatric Association this year, and so I was sent to a meeting with the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, and they had a similar discussion about alternate pathways to boarding, essentially. And the two things that I took from that are really similar to ours, one was the concern about cultural competence. One of the people who was in the APA group is a child psychiatrist named Sudhakar Shenoy, who practices in Chicago, and said that he said it took him several years to really learn the culture that, coming from India to the United States. And that was as a resident and then a fellow. And so by the time he finished his fellowship, he felt like he really understood where people were coming from and, that there were not remaining issues. But he was very concerned about someone skipping that step and then attempting to catch up on the cultural issues later. And most of the materials that we've been given don't really stress that, when to me that's one of the key points. The other thing that was very parallel to our experience was that one of the people who's on the board said that he had felt pressured to like come up with a quick way of like boarding people, like do this now. And they had just put on the brakes and said, no, we're going to look at this in a thoughtful manner. And, we're not going to be goaded into doing something precipitously that may not work well. And I was really struck by how similar the situation is, that, nobody wants to just flat out say no, but everybody wants to make sure that this is done in a way that protects patients and sets up physicians to be successful in practice rather than sort of rushing it through. I like the idea of possibly banding together with other states or linking in with New York or something like that, in that I'm also struck by the fact that whenever we've been sent materials, it emphasizes that this is a way of getting physicians to rural areas, which, without mentioning, PS, those are often located in states that have the thinnest resources and can't really handle, setting up a major system for a large number of people. So yeah, I'm wondering also if it's worth emphasizing, that point as well, the fact that this is not a panacea for rural practice. But I do like that suggestion.
David Kader.
Yeah, I agree with all the comments, particularly the burden on a small board and the burden of reviewing the countless number of international medical schools. That those points have already been made. One point made at a prior meeting is that there is could be an inherent conflict of interest for an evaluating organization if that organization is also employing the physician. So there's a conflict of interest there, and that should be pointed out. A point I made at a prior meeting about this is kind of one of my pet peeves. The introduction to this document talks about providing physicians for shortage in rural areas, and I think it's aspirational, but I think it's a worthy goal to expect that we should be able to provide the highest trained physicians to some of our shortage in rural areas where they're often working with minimal collegial support. So I had a problem with that introduction each time I read it, and the implication is, well, maybe these people aren't good enough for the health centers, but they're okay out there in the sticks. So somehow it may be worthwhile making that point. Thank you.
Thank you. David Hurley.
Yeah, and I just, we've had a few people mention the rural issue, and something that came up at the meeting that Rick and I attended last year, and throughout the discussion of the first document, was the idea that the most rural areas are going to be some of the it's going to pose real challenges for many of the participants in terms of having support and adapting to life in the United States. That can be really more of a challenge in rural areas, which tend to be less diverse and have fewer services. So I think it's, as David said, it's not a panacea, and we should be counting on this to fix the shortages in rural areas.
The feedback I had was pretty targeted. So I think most of the document's actually good. I think the first page needs another paragraph. I think the targeted description of here's the different things that the board should be doing in their level of involvement, great. I put in chat sort of what my thoughts were there, but I can read it out loud. And what I wrote was individual state medical boards play a critical role in ensuring the safe and effective transition of internationally trained physicians into the U.S. healthcare system. To fulfill this responsibility, boards must be equipped with adequate resources, both financial and operational, to support rigorous oversight, meaningful assessment, and appropriate supervision. It's also the responsibility of state medical boards to ensure that the supervising organizations are free from conflicts of interest, with oversight and evaluation ideally conducted by an independent entity. That's what they do in Canada, by the way, which I think is really intelligent. These safeguards are essential not only to protect the public, but also ensure that the ITPs receive support they need to succeed in practice and serve the communities with competence and confidence. So I think they need another sentence or paragraph in there just to sort of, we have concerns about this. And if you don't do these things right, there's a real risk of, not only affecting the ITPs, but also the communities they serve in. And I don't know they're open to, that degree of feedback, but I think they need another paragraph in there. Again, most of the document I think is well worded and in the right setting could be okay, but I would be very fearful of Maine, of some, state medical boards that don't have a lot of resources actually doing this. And frankly, I don't know how much of a risk this really is in 2025 where we are with ICE right now, but that being said, I still think we shouldn't have a guidance document that's poorly drafted.
Hopefully this will survive the current crisis. We should look at this as if it's a long range project, but I hear you.
All right, so we have until the 11th, again, to submit recommendations. If there are other comments that people have that they want to take a minute to submit to David, please do so. But I think I've heard pretty consistency on some of the concerns that people have and maybe some guidance we can give to FSMB.
Okay, and I'll get that email out. I'll do my best to make sure it goes out today. If not, it'll be tomorrow.
Great. All right. Next item on the other business agenda is additions to proposed changes to Board of Medical Practice Administrative Rules. Dave, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I hate to do this to all of you, but please bear with me. And I promise for those of you who can remember doing this in the past, when we had tons of changes to go over, it's not going to be as painful as it has been in the past. It's a fairly short list, but I really do want to run it all by you. I was going to send out a read ahead with the revised draft that has all the changes in it, but it was just too much for you to look at. It's the document's about 80 pages long, and it would be really hard to distinguish between these newly added changes and the ones that were approved by the board last year. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to share my screen and run through them. I think it'll be pretty quick. So my apologies for doing this to you. So you should all be seeing a document that has the revised draft that the board approved last year, and it was shared with the VDH policy team in August of last year, and then with the edits that we've made this year that I have been previewing for you. The first change that we made is on pages 4 and 5, and this one is actually just in going over this. I realized that we kind of had a little bit of a hole. We have language in there that requires people who have a license to provide updates since their last renewal, but we didn't have an explicit statement in the rules that a new applicant needs to amend their answers. And it's not unusual for somebody to submit their application in 1 month and then take 6 months to get us all the other pieces that we need to get if they're not in a hurry to get a license. And a lot could have transpired in that time. And so in section 4.0, I changed the title to add, it said licensing process, licensing committee, and applicant's right to a written decision. And we're adding at the end of that, and applicant duty to amend answers, and then inserting a new paragraph or section at 4.3 an applicant must immediately notify the board of any errors or changes to any answer on the application that arise at any time up until the board acts on the application.
David, Dawn has her hand raised. Did you have a comment on this?
Well, not specifically, more in the process, David. If these were adopted by the board last year and the department hasn't gotten to it, I'm sure that's because of the commissioner retiring and whatever, but do you have any information about that? And do you have any sense of whether or not these changes, suggested changes, can be addressed soon so these can start the process of being, going through the APA process?
I'm very hopeful that they're going to. I mean, last summer was it really, from a staffing standpoint, they really had problems. They had lost a couple of people, and they were struggling to keep up. And I would be very confident that they would get, because we've waited so long, they're back up to full staffing in the unit, and they're in a good position now. The complicating factor is that life has really been turned upside down in the health department, and most of the health department, much more so than we have been affected by, like, the other divisions. So the policy team is spending an awful lot of time dealing with a lot of other issues, but I'm encouraged, and I think that they will support us in getting these processed reasonably quickly.
Great, thanks.
Okay, the next change is on page 11 and 12, and that's in section 15.0, and this is has to do with the identification standard used by FCBS. Last year, the board approved a decision to require all applicants to use FCBS, and those changes were already put in. And the language here at the bottom of page 11 and onto the top of page 12 said, as evidenced by a birth certificate or a copy of a naturalization certificate, FCBS has changed their process, and now it's completely different. And so I put in language just to say that they must have proof of identity, that the applicant is at least 18 years of age, as evidenced by documented completion of the FCBS identification process. And if they make any changes to their process, we won't have to change the language of the rule. This is just saying the board accepts, we rely on FCBS, which is a quality organization. We accept their processes. And so that should solve that. In the same section, there's a few different places where we address a change that was effective yesterday. And as of yesterday, Canadian medical schools are no longer being accredited by the LCCME, LCME rather, which is the accrediting body for U.S. medical schools. They were having a dual accreditation, both by the Canadian accrediting body and the LCME, and as of yesterday, they are no longer having the LCME accreditation. So the upshot of that is that individuals who attend medical school in Canada and who complete their medical school after July 1st, 2025 will need to have an ECFMG certificate. And they'll be treated like IMGs in that respect. And so we are adding language here that says they need to have an ECFMG certificate. And that is, there's some other places where we need to mention that as well, but that's the additional change in 15.0. Moving on to the next change in 16.0, which is a provision that we added the last time as required by a change in Vermont law a few years ago, where we were required to provide a pathway to licensure for people who had satisfactorily practiced for at least 3 years and are in good standing in another jurisdiction. And so we had to put in the list of things that are required, again, because this has a different laundry list of what they must submit. We again state the requirement for someone who graduates from a Canadian medical school with a graduation date after July 1st, 2025, they must have an ECFMG certificate.
Judy has a hand up too.
Thank you. Judy?
I just wondered why that change to the dual process took place.
I don't know why. I think that maybe the Canadians decided that it wasn't worthwhile for them to get the dual accreditation. It may have been a cost factor, but
I can speak to that somewhat. The LCME review has become very expensive for preparation from schools, and you know the Canadian system has their own. It's called the CACMS. It's their own accreditation. So now to have to do two, which are probably both expensive, was a lot, and probably really didn't add much in terms of improving the quality of the school at all. The CACMS is pretty good. The Canadian schools are good. I just have another question, David, though. What if these people, and I knew this was happening, but now with these alternative pathways, there are also residency programs in the US, and there's usually been pretty open movement back and forth across the border, but this could really change that, because they would now, if you did a residency in Toronto, for instance, which is an excellent medical school and graduate medical education program, now you would, and you wanted to come to the States, you'd be considered, you know, an alternative pathway person.
Well, and that's a broader discussion. And because of the nature of these changes, I had a conversation and asked if we could sneak in some more changes without holding up what we did last year at all. And they said, yeah, get it to us quickly. So that will be a conversation, but the rule right now, our rules will, as they stand now, recognize that we won't treat them as a foreign trained physician if they complete a Canadian residency. Okay. That's a conversation for another day, and I just thought it was too much to bite off right now.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Thanks.
The timing couldn't be worse in terms of the optics. I mean, this is just sad.
Yes. And in Vermont, we have, I mean, the flow is really important. We have a lot of Canadian educated and graduate
nurses too
in the state. Yes.
And we actually have licensees who practice in both the Canada and the US simultaneously.
Yep.
Don, was that a
Don.
leftover hand?
I actually only had one, even though it says two. David, is the health department still aspiring to be on a 3-year cycle of reviewing and revising regs? Do you know?
I don't know.
Okay.
That certainly, if they were, that plan
It's gone by the
certainly,
wayside. Because it
got-
used to be that years and years would go by. And, over a decade ago, they adopted this routine of reviewing, which means, pretty quickly you're revising them again so you can catch up. But maybe
Yeah.
that doesn't happen anymore. I don't know.
okay. So we just went over the change in 16.0. The next one is on page 18 and 19. And this is in the section about applications to take the USMLE in Vermont, which is probably an outdated language. It's with Vermont being considered the sponsoring state. And we added language in there because it talks about ECFMG certificate for that. And so we also had to add in the note that it used to say if the applicant is a graduate of a medical school outside of the United States or Canada, and now there's a period after United States and a new sentence added to say graduates of Canadian medical schools must have an ECFMG certificate if they graduated on or after July 1st, 2025. And the next change is on page 19. Also, and I'm sorry, yeah, it's in section 21. And this is about an admission that Tracy and I noted in going over these rules and making these updates. And the laundry list of for limited temporary license was missing one of the items that we require, the board's affidavit and authorization for release of information form. And so that's been corrected by adding that. The next change is on page 23. And I just note, I noticed that the last time when the rules were done, when they were formatted for us, they ended up with 2 sections with number 24. So we'll fix that, and the number of every section after 24 will have 1 added. This is in the continuing medical education requirements, and as you'll all recall, you voted to revise the CME requirements to accept the AAFP activities. And so the rules only provided for essentially the AMA PRA category 1 activities. I added a new section that says that activities certified by an ABMS specialty board may be approved by the board by motion. And so this basically ratifies what you did a couple months ago when you had a motion to accept those AAFP credits. And as we discussed when you were considering that, there are some activities that are put out by the ACOG, the College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. That's the only one that I've been able to find any evidence that they sponsor CME Nobody has asked for that to be accepted as activity. If they do, then we won't have to do a rule change. You would be able to approve that by a motion. And so that's all we had to do to accommodate that change. And then the last one is in section 28, which is on page 26 and 27. And this is just a repeat on what we had to do above in the physician section based on the change in the FCVS identification process, because we require PAs to use FCVS as well. Those are the only two professions who can use FCVS. And so that change is made there also. So that's it. I hope that wasn't too painful. I'd be happy to answer if there's any more questions. And then Rick, I would like to have the board approve these additional changes formally with a motion, if that's possible.
David, thank you for doing this. This is another one of those totally thankless but necessary tasks. Just saying.
Well,
Absolutely.
thank you.
I'll
Move-
make a motion, I'll make a motion to approve the changes that have just been reviewed to the rules revision.
Great. Can I get a second?
I'll second that, Philibert.
Great. Any further discussion on the proposed changes? No? All right. If you're all ready, all those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Abstentions or recusals? Great.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Passes. Any other items for other business? Didn't see any.
That's it.
All right, I believe next up is for us to discuss things in executive session, and if I can get a motion to enter executive session to discuss those, I will take that now.
So moved.
So move,
Second.
Philibert.
Great, we got a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great, see you on the flip side.